Good morning, good evening to all my fellow interns of Cinema Diagnostics. I am the cinematologist, and this is another edition of Dissecting Cinema, a podcast brought to you by lowres.live. And tonight's review is of the very anticipated Marvel follow-up to their quite eventful 2018. This one being Captain Marvel, the last film in the lineage, mind you, before the culmination in Avengers Endgame, which is coming out, I believe, at the end of April. And with me tonight, I have a software engineer who is quite into the video game sphere as well, Josh M. Josh is an old friend of mine, and we're in this kind of group chat online where he, myself, and a number of other friends from days past kind of shoot the shit about what's going on in the moviescape or the cinemascape as of right now. And Josh and I have some contrasting thoughts about Captain Marvel.
Your life began the day it nearly ended. We found you. With no memory, we made you one of us. So you could live longer, stronger, superior. You were reborn.
I keep having these memories. Something in my past is the key to all of this.
You know how to fly this thing?
We'll see.
That's a yes or no question.
Yes.
I have an article that will be going up on lowres.live at any time, chronicling in depth my thoughts about Captain Marvel. But since Josh and I have a difference in opinion, I thought it would be great to bring him on tonight. So, Josh, how you doing?
Hey, what's up? How's it going?
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. So, yeah, for those of us who aren't familiar with you or what stuff you're into, what can you tell the listeners about yourself that might give them some background on what kind of stuff you're into creatively?
Sure. Yeah, definitely a nerd by all means of the definition. I love anime, I love video games, I love, comic books, I love comic book movies. But my bread and butter is sci-fi and cyberpunk. My favorite film of all time is actually Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner.
Oh, nice.
And that is and my favorite anime of all time is Cowboy Bebop, which took heavy influence from Blade Runner and that cyberpunk sort of atmosphere. So I don't necessarily consider myself a practiced film critic by any means, but I feel as though in this sort of sphere of criticism and conversation, I think it's good for anybody to be able to get their feet wet and have a nice opinion and conversation about this kind of stuff.
Oh, no, absolutely. And yeah, especially today, because my feelings on the critical circuit are pretty negative overall. I think anybody that follows my Facebook page or anything would see that, just because I think there's a really harsh dynamic going on in the critical sphere right now, and Captain Marvel is kind of the epitome of that, in my opinion. There's headlines recently of Rotten Tomatoes deleting 50,000 user reviews due to their, wavering opinions in terms of the film's quality. So to have anybody with a really informed background like yourself, Josh, I think is more than enough to provide for a good conversation. So I'll start this off by turning it over to you. What I'm going to ask you are a couple general questions, and maybe we can figure out what you thought specifically about this film.
Sure.
So first off, what did you expect to get? And then when you left the theater, what did you feel you got in return?
Sure. So initially going in, a lot of the, pre-press, pre-viewing criticism of the movie I did not escape, right? There was a lot of negative reception, or rather, a negative atmosphere surrounding the movie initially. So I came in with lower than low expectations in the movie. I really thought it was going to be a very terrible movie, judging from what I've been hearing from other people. But then I sat in and I watched the movie, and I walked out and I said, wow, this wasn't by any means a terrible movie at all. I thought the movie was actually quite enjoyable. And as far as standalone, singular Marvel hero characters go, I thought it was probably one of the better origin stories. I thought it was handled very well, and there was a lot of different things mixed in. Some negative, not to say the movie was perfect. Obviously, I'm not going to place it up that high. But ultimately, I went in with low expectations. This may have skewed my initial opinion of the movie. But I enjoyed it. I ended up leaving the theater questioning why there was so much negative reception.
Yeah, well, you kind of touched on it a second ago. I think some of the negative reception was maybe in Brie Larson putting her foot in her mouth a little bit early on in the whole press junket phase of when the anticipation for this movie was building up. She kind of dispelled the notion of guys, or in particular white guys, criticizing certain movies based on their social makeup. And I think that was a big kick in the ass to the movie's PR. I don't think she did them any favors initially. But for me, I mean, I heard that and I was just kind of like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me. But I think the other aspect to this is that it's definitely an experiment in what many would call socially conscious filmmaking, or excuse me, socially conscious filmmaking. And with that comes a lot of, I think, entailments of what's going to be going on in the outside world in terms of, like I said, the critical sphere. You'll have maybe half of the internet that's very excited about it because it's about a socially conscious topic, and then you have half of the internet that isn't really excited about it because they feel maybe we've gotten too much of that, or we've gotten enough of it already. So I think that's what was really brooding the atmosphere for that buildup of the movie. But, I mean, okay, so in all honesty, I don't like the movie. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's any good, rather.
Right.
And the reason being are really, the last reasons are because of maybe those aspirations that the film has to be this socially conscious, captivating film. I just thought structurally this movie was all over the place. And to be honest, if it was trying to be a little stupider and a little more mindless, I think it would have been a better movie. I know in our chat that you and I are a part of, there was talk of, oh, well, it's not like Iron Man 2, is it? Or it's not like Thor 2. Now, listen, full disclosure, I liked Iron Man 2 quite a bit. Mind you, this was years ago, so my opinions have changed a little bit over time. But even in hindsight, I can say, looking back at that movie, it really wasn't trying to be anything bigger than what it was. It was trying to be very, again, mindless, kind of dumb popcorn flick. And I think it succeeded in just its honest approach at not really trying to shoot for the stars, so to speak. Yep. But with this one, the issues are because I think it's shooting so high for those the kinds of aspirations of being this cornerstone film in terms of female empowerment and in terms of representation and genre. I think because those aspirations are so high, many of the other very important parts of the film that are its makeup suffer. Now, we can get into specifics after I hear your side of this. Yep. But, I mean, what did you make of that whole angle, the socially conscious aspect, or the hype around the idea of female empowerment around this movie?
I kind of, from the trailers, I kind of grasped that this kind of stuff was going to be put into the film. And ultimately, when I go to view a film, I try my best to be as objective as possible. And, when a movie incorporates any sort of social commentary, political commentary, something that, relates back to reality, my first question is not whether or not that this should be in the movie or whether or not it draws away from the movie. To me, it says, does this resonate within the film's core? Does it work well within the layers and the context that the film tries to create? That way, the overall experience makes sense. If it just seems to be jabbed in there just for the sake of making a statement so people are able to walk away and that's the only thing you think about, then I believe that's a negative point. But to me, the theme of female empowerment ties well into the character, but I think her performance, as well as some of those scenes and how her character develops throughout the narrative, it makes sense within the confines of the story, and I was never it never threw me out or it never upset me, and that was what I thought was going to happen. I can't think of any certain comparisons to films nowadays, but I mean, a good comparison actually would be, personally, this might be a sort of a hot topic opinion, but I hate the Fast and Furious films. Like I cannot stand these movies at all.
Overkill, right?
Yeah, they're overkill, and they're overkill in a different dynamic. To the extent that, maybe, I can say this: you can make the valid statement that Captain Marvel is about female empowerment. It's about shoving it in your face to an extent. I would say the opposite goes for Fast and Furious, where it's clearly to a fault how almost retarded it is with how these characters behave within the universe. They created their own Marvel Cinematic Universe with why the physics work and how the characters behave, and the over sexualization of women, the over masculinity of men. Don't get me wrong, dude. I fucking love. You can ask anybody. I love me some fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. I love the hyper masculine fucking Commando. Total Recall, fucking Running Man. I love that shit. But, there's a certain difference when you have a character who's charismatic, who can carry a performance, who's this, titular action hero, who can always, deliver the funny lines, deliver it with charm, as opposed to, like, fucking Tyrese Gibson with some nonchalant fucking stereotypical black thing that he says. And it's like, dude, I'm like, this is like the 9th movie he's done this, and it's not funny when he's the cop, really, and it's expected. You expect him to say something dumb like that. But anyway, it's walking into the film, I knew the female empowerment was going to be a huge thing, and I guess for me, my political spectrum is mostly, I don't really lean one way or the other, or even in the middle. I try to keep myself as, less opinionated as possible, or keep myself outside of a bucket. That way I don't necessarily come with a bias. So when all this female empowerment came on the screen, my concern wasn't that, this is the biggest theme taken away from the movie. And there are some other themes that are in the movie as well that I feel like aren't being talked about by either reviewers or other people who've seen the movie. Everybody seems to focus in only on the female empowerment, which I don't blame them for because it's there. But the film was more than that, I think.
Would you like to know what you really are?
I think I had a life here. What aren't you telling me?
You've come a long way, but you're not as strong as you think. This war is just the beginning.
I'm not gonna fight your war. I'm gonna end it.
Well, yeah, and listen, that theme is totally cool by me. I'm all about it. The concern on my end was, how were they going to portray this, and how is this going to be self-evident in the film itself? And I think my real gripe with it is that we are told numerous times throughout the film how great Captain Marvel is, or Carol Danvers, or Vers, whatever you want to call her in this instance. We're told time and time again how strong she is, and how mighty she is, and everything, how great she is, over and over. And I think, well, that's one of many problems, because why don't you just see it? We can see everything on screen. You've got this giant budget behind it, probably $200 million, and I think too much of the film is bogged down in verbalizing it, and in just kind of this self-congratulatory redundancy, in my opinion, of, yeah, she's a fucking superhero. Of course she's amazing. You don't need to go on 3 5-minute soliloquies about it toward the end of the film. We've learned this, or we should have. And in addition to that, I think the hurdles in which Carol has to jump over throughout this film really seem to only be reduced to, well, mean men. How many times do we see the several flashbacks of her getting beaten up, bullied, taunted, neglected, or just degraded by these mean men who seem to have no wants or desires other than just stomping down on the aspirations of women? After probably the second or third time they went through that kind of montage of all those traumatic events in her life, if you want to call them traumatic, I was just saying, well, it's not necessarily the way to do it. The film, to me, was only saying that men were the obstacle, really, and that perception of being lesser because you're a woman was the obstacle. Whereas I think what the movie would have been better in doing would to just show her natural progression, not confined to the opinions or ridicule of men, but toward the actual situation, and toward the existential threat that was going on in the film. So that's the main thematic element, and its follow through that just didn't resonate with me, because it felt a little after school specially, in my opinion. It just felt like something you would watch in grade school, like, oh, well, don't bully girls if they want to play baseball or ride go-karts or join the military. Yeah, now listen, we know there's a bunch of dickwad guys out there that are going to act that way. When all is said and done, that's not the stuff that's going to resonate. I think it's going to be the genuine journey that you're putting your character on, and I think confining it to that is just a little short-sighted.
I do disagree with a few things there. You did note that the fact that she goes through this journey, right, and then it seems to be that these men, kind of go through and treat her badly, and that the depiction or the overall message here is that men are evil. But I personally think that this sort of view hasn't really been done that often. As you said, this is a new socio-economical thing to do within films right now. And for me, it's a new take, right? Like I don't.
Well, wait, I hate to interrupt, but just on that, it's actually not a new thing. This is something that's been done for years before. You could go back. I mean, one film that pops in my head is something like G.I. Jane. I believe it took place in a real life story about a woman that was in the military and busted her ass, essentially. Yeah. So that's another aspect to this dynamic. It's that it's not anything new, especially not by 2019. Right. There are plenty of films over time in this vein. I think even dating back to probably the 70s, if I just do my homework, but I can probably back that up.
No, I believe you. Probably not. Yeah, I believe you. I thought one really cool thing they did was there's a sequence where she's on. Spoiler alert for anybody watching. I don't know if I'm allowed to spoil anything on here.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. But just for people who want to skip ahead, there's a sequence in the film where she is on a Skrull ship and she is sort of being tortured, essentially, or people are trying to probe her memories, and like her interactions while she's in those memories, as well as the revelation to the viewer as to what was going on in her past. I thought that was a really cool way of providing exposition for the plot, because you're able to see some of the disjointed memories that she's unable to properly interpret as her past, as well as have her sort of be juxtapositioned in those memories as well, and while she's trying to escape torture. It was a really cool scene that I found that nobody really talked about, but I personally found it cool. But
no, I actually didn't think that was a bad scene. I thought that was probably the most effective way to tap into that. Just after that, I feel, though, we saw too much of the same thing. And then, again, by the film's end, we went through the montage like the third time in the film. And by then, I was like, okay, we probably would have got it after the first time. I think they were kind of treating the audience a little bit like they were idiots by that last time they had shown it.
Yeah. So there's those montage sequences where she's being treated poorly by men, and they're telling her she can't do this, she can't do that. And while I saw those scenes, the first time I saw it, I thought to myself, okay, sure, yeah, this is female empowerment, this is them trying to say a message. But I thought to myself, okay, what else is here? Is there any other substance here? Is this part of her character? Is this why she's so determined? Is this why she's so hot-headed? Is this why she's so brash? Is this why she remained to be emotional and stubborn despite people telling her not to be that way her entire life? Is this playing into her character and how she behaves later on in the film? And for me, it all still worked correctly within her character. She's still, by the end, there's a scene where you have the character who's been played by Jude Law, I forget his name, who, she tries to get her to fight mano a mano, which you might view this scene negatively. I'm sure you probably do, but
Actually, no, I know what you're going to say, but I actually saw that as a positive toward the film.
Yeah, there's a scene where, he goes, fight me mano a mano, show me that you were able to, like, control your emotions. She's like, no, fuck off. Like, I don't, this is, me controlling my power. I don't need to work on the regulations of somebody else. And I thought, okay, I guess that as far as not necessarily being a direct, or it could be interpreted as direct, I did interpret it this way, as a direct sort of, male, containerization of her free will, or her ability to have her own emotional spectrum. I thought that, oh, this is cool. She sort of developed here to the point where she said, I don't actually need these limitations. I can, be myself. I can be stubborn. I can be rash. I can be this cocky sort of hero without having to listen to what other people have their expectations be set for me. So yeah, I didn't mind all of those scenes, mainly because the first time I saw it, I understood what it was, but after a while, I felt that for the DNA of the movie, it worked well as sort of characterizing Captain Marvel, or Vers, or whatever the fuck you want to call her.
Yeah, no, and that was actually a good point you just made. But I do think the subtext is there. The subtext is definitely there, that Jude Law is playing this patriarchal figure that's really laying out the rules, or the I suppose, accepted kind of behavior on part of Carol. So the subtext is definitely there. I do agree with you that the payoff toward the end, when she just kind of blasts him away like, yeah, go to hell, I think it was a good payoff. But yeah, I do think that it's bogging itself down in just that her obstacles really seem to only be confined to this male perception of what she has to be, whether it's, again, Jude Law's character, which none of us know his name. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. Or the several male figures throughout her life. You see her father was very disapproving. Then you see, her trouble in the military. So it all falls under that umbrella. And again, I just think, sure, I suppose for the sake of the plot, it works and it gets you beginning to end. And yeah, it makes sense. But I don't think it's the most compelling or really captivating way, especially after, like we said, this has been done before and it comes off a little hokey. And I know it's a Marvel movie and everything, but when it's being advertised as this benchmark in women's film history, kind of like how Wonder Woman was a couple of years ago, I think you got to do something a little different. And I think you need to take a risk. An example I would speak of isn't exactly kid or family friendly, is another Marvel property, ironically, Jessica Jones. I think if you've watched that, maybe you can agree with me. I think that does a much better job. It might not do the best job, but it does a pretty good job in really, I think, molding a complex kind of psychology to a female character and showing a very flawed person that has that good in them and is always struggling with that kind of internal strife of the temptation to act erratically and to act, I guess, brashly at times when needed, but to also have that very humane side. I think Jessica Jones did quite a good job, and sure, they had more, I guess, time throughout 2 seasons to stretch it out. Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like the character was so, I think, eloquently put together and played by Kristen Ritter that's the kind of angle you have to take. Maybe it's not the most family friendly, but they know they're going to get people in the seats to watch these movies, and their main market, I believe, is in the teenage bracket. So that's my line of thinking. I'm starting to understand more from your perspective. I do agree. In the case of onions, right? If you're talking about layers, then no, Danvers is not. Ogres have layers.
Danvers is not a really well layered character, right? She suffers from the amnesia sort of plot line, right? Where she's sort of, what we find out for her to be is mostly done by what the characters are saying, or as you said, the repeated sense of, oh, she's amazing, by all the different characters that are saying it throughout the film. So it's not as good of a characterization for her throughout the movie. And I think that is a negative point, right? I'm saying this movie is mediocre to good, or good to mediocre, depending on whatever direction you want to point it in. I don't think this is one of the better Marvel movies. But I don't think, for me, it never really was that much of an issue for her character, in the sense that I knew it was going to be an origin story. And to the same vein, I think that as far as her development as a character in relation to her amnesia and all that stuff, I still think it's better than a lot of the other original Marvel movie singular, origin stories. I think Captain America, for instance, he doesn't really change. I mean, and that's part of his whole charm, is that Cap is, that's part of the theme of the movie, is that don't change, right? The guy before he died was like, hey, remember what's in your heart. This is why I chose you for this experiment, blah, 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 blah. So that makes sense. Ultimately, it didn't, once again, I want to draw attention to it, it didn't deter from the experience for me. It was, oh, okay, this is, why the way she is, the way she's stubborn, the way she's brash or whatever. But one thing that's not, sorry to go on a tangent here, but one thing that I don't,
no, by all means,
that's not drawn upon is that, there are other themes in regards to her relationship with the other characters, the Kree, I believe they're called, was that there's a military component to this as well. Also, there's a military component to refugees of war that no one's talking about. As for instance, the Skrull, you go in and you find out that they're actually just refugees, and they're just trying to find a place to live. And the Kree are basically telling them that no, you need to fall under martial law. We're the ones controlling the air. We're controlling space. We're controlling these areas. You guys aren't listening. Therefore, you guys should be underneath the boot and heel. You guys should be eradicated. underneath it all, there are certain scenes that show that she was she had a moral compass, right? She wanted to do something for the greater good, despite, I mean, she's a hero, right? So obviously she wanted to do something like that. But there was more mechanics to that than simply just I just want to prove to men that I'm good and I'm strong.
Well, yeah, I think you made a lot of good points there. I don't want to get too hung up on this one part of the movie because there's more to talk about. But
of course.
that's been the central kind of debate among the audiences, at least. The critics are pretty uniform in their praise. I think, as much as I hate Rotten Tomatoes, I think this has like 81%. So the critics are pretty much all in the same line of thinking. The audience, yeah, there's a divide there, and that's the main divide. And I think you can surmise from my take and Josh's take what's the general kind of back and forth. So I don't think we should hang on that any longer, because I think there's more aspects to this film that we can talk about, because there's more than just that I disliked about the movie. But no, what I will give here, I'll give a little expose for what I actually did like about the movie. So we'll make this kind of a good, bad, good, or bad, good, bad sandwich.
Yeah.
And what I liked about the movie were a few things. So what I'll start off with is there were actually a few scenes here and there of decent sci-fi action. I would say about 15 minutes worth out of this 120-minute movie, roughly. I think there's a good 15 to 20 minutes of genuine diversion in there. The action is fast-paced. And, well, maybe, Josh, maybe you can chime in on this. There were some good vibes, like, early on. I was getting some kind of, like, Stargate vibes or something like that, like one of those old shows from the 90s and early 2000s. So some of those adventurous sci-fi type shows, I was getting that kind of feeling, which isn't bad in my opinion. I actually kind of like that hokey sci-fi stuff. That was one of the aspects I enjoyed. The action wasn't the best by Marvel's standards, but I thought, for all sakes and purposes, it didn't bore me, and I'm sure it didn't for you.
No, I did like the action. Definitely not the best out of all the Marvel movies, right? It's really tough for me now after having seen Winter Soldier. I don't know if you agree or not, but the action in that movie still, by all means, is probably still the best I've seen.
A lot of fantastic hand-to-hand combat scenes.
And, I'll take a well-choreographed, well-shot hand-to-hand combat scene over some sort of CGI fight any time of day or the week, And that's,
absolutely.
And that's why, that part of the Winter Soldier is so good. But I do agree that, it had some good action here and there. Ultimately, some of the hand-to-hand scenes or some of the, personal fight scenes kind of felt short to me. Mainly, there's a sequence towards the end where, she has she supposedly has the Tesseract in this lunchbox, and they're all sort of fighting her in this room. And there's a lot of 90s gags, which I'm sure we'll get into later. And overall, that fight scene after she sort of unhindered her powers, I felt was a little just too, it's one of those things where we have issues I have with the Marvel movies, which is power scaling, right? Like this, she can shoot fucking photons out of her arms, and she's sitting there and she's like punching these people, and she's like getting punched back, and it's like, what is really happening here? Like, you need to just clear, like when you initialized your power in the beginning, you cleared the room. They all got wiped. They all got floored. And then now we're going back in this fight scene, and you're like, you're like punching this person, you like throw him across the room. It's like, no, this should be a wipe clean out. Like this should have been a sequence similar to the Winter Soldier. Sorry to draw a comparison again, where Cap is in the elevator and he just wipes them out clean. It's a sequence that's fast, it's quick, and you understand the power behind him because he just completely wipes. Nobody gets back up. It's a 1-2 deal. And this whole scene goes on for a few minutes, and you're like, why isn't she just taking them out? Like she can he has all his power. They need to be done and down already. And that sort of irritated me as part of the fight scenes. But overall, I do agree that there were some good, decent ones at the beginning when she's flying through the air and she's shooting all the ships. I thought that was really cool. When she learned how to fly, that was a really cool moment as well. And also that sequence where they raid the planet, where they try to find out that guy who was missing, whatever, and they turn out to all be Skrulls. I thought that scene was really good too. But yeah, it's hit and miss for me. Some of the scenes fell short, but the combat overall wasn't that bad.
No, you're making a good point again, and yeah, we're gonna keep drawing this comparison to the Winter Soldier, because I think that was again the premier example in Marvel's lineup of choreographing action and just getting the most out of the possibilities of the scene. Like you had mentioned, the scene in the elevator with Cap, and there's about 10, 12 guys surrounding him, and he just takes them all out in about a 90-second sequence. And see, this stems from a pretty fail-safe formula in terms of action scripting. It's when you have a character such as Captain America or Captain Marvel, it's what can the most interesting action scene be with this character's limitations? And
Yes.
you see that in the Winter Soldier when he goes up against Bucky, and Bucky's enhanced and he's got the arm, but then you see it in the scenes where he has to take on 12 pretty strong fight very worthy opponents in the elevator. So you see the limits to which the character is pushed. In Captain Marvel, I agree with you that I don't think we see that. And when, like you said, they minimize it for the sake of, I guess, bolstering the runtime, that's where, like I said, you get about 15 to 20 good minutes, and then the rest is maybe hit or miss because it's too procedural. And like you said, it begs the question of, well, why doesn't she just do this? And maybe that's a plot hole to some people, but I just think it's a little bit of laziness, and I think it's a little bit of bloating on part of the screenwriters and the direction.
No, it is bloating, and it is unnecessary. It's the reason why that scene of Captain America in the elevator is so compelling, it's so satisfying, even though it's such a short sequence, is because it ties in not only well with the character, it ties in well with what's going on currently with the plot, and it's executed perfectly. Everything makes sense in that scene. But when you have a scene where you show a character who just had, her limits, broken, right? Like she had limiters on her body, and then she got them removed, and now she's able to fight like uninhibited. And then she's like, in this room, and she's fighting people who are just basically foot soldiers at this point compared to her. And then she's like, it's like a whole sequence of this happening, and it's like, why is this happening? She should just take people out and they should just leave. They should not be taking this long unless you're trying to, overtly show how powerful she is, which is not, maybe you can do that, maybe you can't, but it's not entertaining when that's in the mind of the viewer.
Right. Well, we'll move on from that. So overall, I thought the action scenes were pretty fun in spots, and they'll get you. I think they'll get you through the beats of the movie. And I think you seem to be right there with me. So I think we covered that. So now what we're going to talk about is, the other things I liked. Well, two people, Samuel L. Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn. Now, I know this movie wasn't designed for them necessarily, and to be honest, they don't get the best of material to go along with. But lo and behold, Samuel L. Jackson, a 70-year-old man, is really what I think. He's the powerhouse to this, what's supposed to be this energetic girl power movie. But Sam Jackson, who he's de-aged to be 45 in the film, but you see him running later in the movie. He's running like he's 70. But but his genuine gusto and just screen presence, I think, is actually the thing that keeps you invested in the movie more than Captain Marvel. And we'll talk about Ben Mendelsohn in a second, who I just think is a terrific actor. But what did you think about Jackson's expanded role in this film?
Yeah, he has, obviously, as you said, he has a charismatic presence on screen, right? Like, the guy's been doing films for years. He's an amazing actor. And ultimately, I think, as you said, for the fabric of the movie cannot, it cannot be woven without, Samuel Jackson in it. Ultimately, I think a lot of the things that are played off, a lot of the scenes that are done for humor as well as drama, even, they fall short without, Samuel Jackson's presence in there. And also, there's a lot of things in the film that call back to some of the other movies, or at least to his character, that I really like too. And you get to see this side of Nick that, you will not be able to see in any of the other Marvel movies, that I thought was really well done as well. So overall, it's Sam Jackson, right? I don't need to explain to you how good of an actor he is, but ultimately it was a surprising component to the film that I didn't think was going to be such a huge factor. But he totally was there, and his screen presence is definitely not forgotten.
Well, and the strange thing about that, though, is that to me, again, he wasn't given a lot of material to really, I think, go and run with. I think they de-aged him. He's a little bit younger in his tenure at S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury, that is. And he's, I guess, a little bit more naive, but it really doesn't show, I think, any unfamiliarity to his character that was present almost 25 years ago. So, again, I think it's Sam Jackson's just sheer willpower that actually makes this performance and this iteration of the character a lot of fun. And again, that's not necessarily a compliment to the directors or the screenwriting. I think Sam Jackson at points just felt to throw the movie on his back and to just use his good old charm to get through it. And it works. I gotta say, it does work in those instances.
For instance, I can think of a couple of scenes where there is the cat or the flunk or whatever the fuck they call the fucking thing.
Oh.
I don't know. It was funny, but there's a scene where he's holding the cat and it does some fucking crazy shit, right? It eats the Tesseract and eats a bunch of dudes. And his delivery of those lines, even though it may have been a poor line, just his presence on the screen there carried that scene. If he wasn't in that scene, I would have definitely been like, what the fuck is the point of this scene? This is stupid. And I don't care about this. Why is this happening? Why are you drawing me away from the action? This is dumb. But since he's there and it's Samuel Jackson and he's saying something funny, or he's the focus of the scene, it's okay and it gets a pass. And there are things like that happen in the film, either amplify it or they let the scene slide because of Samuel Jackson.
Yeah, and I mean, by his side we have Ben Mendelsohn, who kind of has a double role. He plays he plays I think the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time, or somebody high up, and I think their name is Keller, but he also doubles as the kind of villainous role of the movie, who I think the alien's name, it's one of the Skrull aliens, which you find out isn't bad, but he's set up as such until the third act, and his name I think is Talos or
Talos, yep.
Talos, okay. And for one, I gotta say, the makeup on Mendelsohn I actually liked. I liked not seeing a CGI or motion capture, because their motion capture has been spotty over the years. I liked seeing a genuine, organic alien crafted with makeup effects, latex, silicone, and the whole 10. And you can tell that Mendelsohn at times probably had some difficulty speaking through all that makeup. But the guy, if you've seen him in anything, and he's become a household name really over the last, I want to say 6-7 years in particular, if you've seen him in anything else, he's just got this kind of energy to him and this bravado that he's very captivating as an actor, and he uses that here. And I think what surprisingly, and as much as I don't like this movie, I think surprisingly, he gives this offbeat kind of charm to what's supposed to be the villain throughout the first about 2/3 of the movie. And credit where it's due. I don't think this is because of the actual filmmakers involved. I don't think it's because of the script either. His character has a pretty run-of-the-mill arc once you get to know what his real motivations are. I think it's all on Mendelsohn. It's all on him, and he makes this character somewhat endearing and somewat compelling. And I think again, this is all on part of the actor's talent.
Yeah, he's a fantastic actor. I thoroughly agree, and I think that he's definitely getting more and more roles. I think there's a couple of things here that I'd like to point out. One is the casting. The fact that they cast him for that role works on a couple dimensions for me. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Marvel comics book universe or not, but traditionally speaking, the Skrulls have been villains in the Marvel comics.
I did gather that, yeah.
Yeah, they've always been villains, right? And what they did when they cast Ben Mendelsohn is they cast him in, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but he's been starring in villain roles a lot recently, right? So when I saw him, I was like, oh, dude, this is the Skrull. He's going to be a fucking villain, right? And then from that point in the movie, he was. And I was like, oh, well, I called it. And Dan was sitting next to me and goes, yeah, of course he's a villain, right? He's fucking Ben Mendelsohn, and he's playing a Skrull. Then lo and behold, later on, I found out this guy is not only was he not a villain, but he's this charismatic guy, and he's also delivering fucking comic relief in certain scenes too. And that, for me, amplified the enjoyment of the film during the second half dramatically, because I was completely fooled by the casting as well as, just his performance on screen, because he's definitely fooled me as the villain. And I totally love that. I totally love the jokes that he made. I totally love the sort of deadpan, sort of airy kind of delivery that he did with a lot of the lines in regards to talking to the other scientist guy that he had, as well as talking about the flocking to Samuel Jackson. That's not a cat. Or shapeshift. There's tons of hilarious things that he was able to deliver, just because, as you said, of how such charismatic he is and how well he was able to deliver those lines. So I thought, once again, that was another breakout stand-up performance that once again brought the movie to a higher level of enjoyment for me. Was both Samuel Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn in their respective roles.
Yeah, and okay, I'll put the disclaimer out there if it sounds like I'm backpedaling on my opinion. Listen, I don't think it's a good movie, all right? But I don't think it's unwatchable. And that comes from these very aspects that we're talking about. The Sam Jacksons, the Ben Mendelsohns, and that mindless little bit of action that we have throughout the film that keeps it together. And I totally agree with you that Mendelsohn has a very good sense of timing in this film. His nonchalant nature is really, again, what gives that villain, again, pseudo-villain role, his very offbeat, kind of quirky appeal. And that's always been a weak spot for Marvel films. But in this instance, in what I think is maybe the worst Marvel movie of all the lineup, there's a debate to be had on that. But it's just funny that it has probably one of its most charismatic villains.
And I don't want to, in the spirit of sharing, you're saying things that you liked. There are things that I didn't like as well. And just to briefly touch upon that, I didn't like that her best friend was a single mom. I thought that, as far as female empowerment goes, I thought that was, if we're talking about like the 1-2 punch, that was like the fucking the right hook. That was like the trying to knock me out. It's like, dude, okay, I understand that this is the position you want to take, but she could have had a family, right? She could have had a loving husband. She could have had like family, other kids, and like once the daughter was introduced, you could tell her whole purpose was trying to set up this like next generation thing of like, what example are you setting, stuff like that, and ultimately that rubbed me the wrong way, and that like part of the reason why I don't think this is like a great movie, right? I think it's a good movie. I think it's all right. But that stuff right there, that whole sequence, her friend, I was like, dude, this is, I get it. Like, you already did this part in the movie, but now you're just like, you're weaving in this unnecessarily. Like, she doesn't have to be this way. She could be another character. She could have had a loving, supporting husband that helped her, pursue her dream in the military. She didn't have to be the single mom, and not every single woman in the film needed to be up against the fucking world as it is, in whatever sort of projected state you wanted it to be in.
Okay, so I'm at least somewhat vindicated in my criticisms.
No, you're valid criticisms. I agree.
Okay, so, well, another criticism I have, and this might not be one of the more popular ones, or even one of the ones that everybody's talking about, but I've got to say, the 90s thing, I think it was a gimmick. It was a gimmick, I think, to, listen, as much as guys like us who kind of grew up in the 90s, really formative times for people like us, it's really derivative, and it's because the nostalgic market is so saturated today and it's so exploited that I think to really shoehorn this into the 90s, it has no narrative purpose whatsoever. And
are you saying the 90s wasn't a perfect fucking decade? Are you fucking serious?
Well, listen, hey, that's maybe another podcast to be had. We kind of talked about this on my mid-90s review a few weeks ago, but see, the thing is, this is put up as a veil, in my opinion, to really kind of distract from those holes that are in the story. I mean, really, she had to fall into a blockbuster. Oh, yeah, I remember that too. And she had to look over at the plaza and see a Radio Shack. And she had to go and go on a payphone and use dial-up internet. And yeah, it was worth one little joke. It's just stuff like that I felt... Again, it's appealing to this part of the market that I think is just beyond parody now. It's just nostalgic anything I almost turn off immediately because it doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't feel genuine anymore. So I'm tired of it. And because of that, it seems like, and again, toward the end when Nirvana is just played for no fucking reason in the middle of her dream at the end. Listen, yeah, we all like that song, okay? I was kind of tapping my foot too, but that doesn't make the movie any goddamn better. So the thing for me is that when you throw in gimmicks like that, to me it appears like it's just a cover-up for a bigger problem, and I saw it as the aforementioned issues I had with the movie.
I definitely agree with you there, to an extent. I think that it definitely was a sort of a play on using nostalgia. It's a powerful drug for people, right? They see the 90s thing, they saw blockbusters, they see Radio Shack, oh, I remember that, here's my fucking money. And it really, they used it in a way, it was done tastefully in some places, I think. For instance, I think when, the Kree soldier picked up the fucking Nerf gun and shot it at her because she thought it was a gun because she's uneducated about, Earth, culture and, whatever the case may be. I thought that was funny. But as you said, right, she didn't have to fall in a blockbuster. She didn't have to, look over at the fucking thing and shoot it because it was a fucking mannequin or whatever. She didn't, or a poster board. She didn't have to go to the Radio Shack. They didn't have to do that sequence where, they're loading the disc and she's like, why is it taking so long? She didn't have to go to the internet cafe. All these things, they're some of it makes sense as far as, she's in the 90s and, this is the only way she can do these things. And some of it's like, all right, dude, I remember Blockbuster. I remember Radio Shack. I remember Nerf. I remember how slow dial-up was. I don't need to be, hit over the head with this. As far as it subtracting or distracting from, other poor parts of the film, I don't know. I think that as far as Marvel movies go, they sort of have a habit of doing that. I think the same thing happened with this sequence in Thor 3 where they play Immigration Song towards the end. It's like, I like that movie, but it's like, why are they playing this song at the? It was a really cool sequence and it was fucking awesome. But there are certain times where they'll just do things just for the sake of doing them and it either works or it doesn't. You either like it or you don't. It's either cool and you enjoy the song or you enjoy the sequence, or you're like, why are they doing this? It's very polarizing, and I think there's no way to cut even.
Well, yeah, I just think it kind of sticks out because, again, they went out of their way, I think, to just throw all these images of 90s iconography at us. But then you have to just think for a second and say, well, why? And what is this doing for the movie? It does nothing. I think it's fluff, and it's just fatty tissue on the movie that I think it's only there, again, to appeal to the current trends in the market or just in pop culture right now. And to a detriment as well, I think that also really modernizes this movie in 2019 right now, because who knows, maybe we're not going to give a shit very much about the 90s in 20 years. As much as we all love it, maybe we're not going to give as much a shit about the 90s in 2039 or 2040. Wow, that sounds scary to say. But yeah, it might be true. That might be the instance. And when we go back, hypothetically, and watch a film like this, we're going to say, oh, geez, okay, 90s nods every 5 minutes. Yeah, we get it. We had dial-up, internet cafes. It's stuff like that. And I think it gets in the way when they put in those gimmicks of real introspection on part of the character and real, I think, journey that the character could be experiencing in some other way, rather than using the 90s cliches and just inserting them into beats of the script for the sake of getting you through the movie and, oh yeah, giving you the nostalgia candy at the same time. And as good as nostalgia apparently is for the human mind, I don't think it's necessarily a good ingredient for what's supposed to be a contemporary empowerment girl power movie.
I agree, and I think this goes back to an earlier point you made where the movie's tone, right, is sort of at battles with itself, right? You said it didn't go all goofy, or it could have been goofier and it would have been more acceptable as a film if it decided to go with that tone. Instead, it tries to do, as you said, it tries to be contemporary and have a message, but at the same time it's juxtaposed against all of this, fluff of all this nostalgia 90s that can either detract or it can either, not, relate thematically with what else is being tried to set or being portrayed. And no, I do agree. It wasn't a negative point for me. I did note that they were doing it a little over the top, but once again, I'm trying to consume this thing as an entire thing, and the movie, contextually, it takes place in the 90s. And if they had just reeled it back a little bit, it wouldn't have been an issue. Or rather, I don't think people would have found it an issue, but I do think it's a valid criticism. They shouldn't have fucking gone over the hills. And yeah, the people who are preying on nostalgia at this point with all the fucking remakes and shit happening right now, it's fucking insane. It's like people are out of fucking ideas, and it's like, let's just fucking remake. The Aladdin shit, sorry to go off kilter here. The Aladdin shit is just fucking insane to me. Like, Will Smith is like fucking horrible. Like, he is, like, I don't think he's starting a good movie in the last like 10 fucking years. He just somebody gives him a fucking script, and he doesn't even read it. He's just like, all right, I'll fucking do it. Jaden says I'll do it, I'll fucking do it. It's like, dude, this is like shit. Like, dude, you used to be in such amazing films. You used to do such fantastic performances. Like, stop, like, just grabbing anything you want. Aladdin looks like shit. He looks so bad. But yeah,
that was glorious. I almost want to end there. Oh, geez, I'm tempted. But I will draw a parallel back to the movie before we close, and I'll say, kind of as a counterpart, let's look at Guardians of the Galaxy, something that was pretty notable for dabbling into particularly 1970s and 1980s rock and roll music, kind of as an aesthetic affront for the movie, but we see how it serves a purpose throughout the film, not only keeping the tone in balance and actually giving the main character, Star-Lord, an attachment, a physical attachment to his past and to his mother. it also just blends with everything going on in the movie so tonally and so seamlessly. So that's kind of where nostalgic culture can be used in a good way. Credit to James Gunn. I know he's kind of in in the Lazarus pit right now. But,
yeah, lightly put.
But yeah, I mean, oh geez, and after that Aladdin rant of yours, I think we're in a good spot. So closing thoughts. Yeah, I guess you can go off on the Guardians bit I just did, but closing thoughts overall on Captain Marvel and where it falls into this lineup and what it does for the lead up to Endgame.
Sure. Yeah. I think that if you are going to see the film, I recommend it. My personal opinion was that it's one of the better standalone, singular hero origin stories for Marvel. I think that there is an air of social commentary in the film, and depending on how you feel about these type of things in your movies, it may or may not detract from the experience. But what you'll find underneath everything is, it's just a Marvel movie at its DNA. It's got some decent action scenes. It's got some characterization. It's got some humor. It's it's a Marvel movie through and through. And as far as the Guardians point, that totally. It's done perfectly in those films. The whole retro music and everything. So. It did not do well in Captain Marvel. It felt forced and contrived. But overall, yeah, I still think you should go see it, and I definitely enjoyed it.
All right, and you guys kind of know my thoughts already. I've gone on a bit, but if you want to see them in written form, I guess, you can go to lowres.live and read it there. And then, guys, just stay tuned to the podcast and stay tuned to everything Low Res Wonder Bread coming up in the future. There's plenty more coming where this came from. And Josh, again, I have to thank you for coming on the show, kind of on an impromptu,
sure,
call from me. But yeah, it's been great to have you on. I mean, I'd love to have you back on. You know a lot, and you've got quite a knowledge of pop culture and animation and everything kind of nerd culture that I think goes into even just the average kind of cinema conversation. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem. I'd love to be back on. It's nice talking with someone who kind of knows what we're talking about, as opposed to talking in our group chat and you just get a bunch of refuse and garbage that gets talked about. No, not to my friends, but they say shit and it's just like, whatever.
Oh, it's all part of a healthy conversation. But thank you for saying I at least kind of know what I'm talking about. That's the highest compliment I ever wish to get. So thank you very much on that.
No problem.
All right, guys. And yeah, so thank you for listening to this episode, and tune in next week when I have another film up for dissection. And in the meantime, guys, stay to good movies. I don't think this is one of them. And enjoy them, dissect them, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.